And welcome back. My name is Terry Bates from the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Lab. Here to talk a little bit more about MyEV and getting started with MyEV. We've had several growers, again, trying to get started with MyEV. They are not very comfortable with technology. So we have a couple of these, how to get started, what you should be thinking about before starting with MyEV. And today I wanted to talk about the dreaded spreadsheet. When I talk to growers about collecting information and being able to archive their information and keep it and be able to look at that data and help them with their vineyard management. I mean, there's a lot of growers out there that may have a vineyard notebook at best where they keep data from year in and year out about their yield or their delivered juice soluble solids. And the whole point of this part of MyEV is to help growers collect that data, maintain that data set so that they can start, building that information about their farm and make better management decisions. And those things are done in spreadsheets. So as we talked in the last podcast, the different generations look at keeping records in different ways. Of course, my father, he's the hard copy, keep his records in a file cabinet. Again, you may have a notebook or a place in your barn where you keep records. Where I have lived through the different iterations of digital archiving of data and spreadsheets. And then, of course, in today's age, a lot of that information is stored in the cloud on different types of spreadsheets. So, whether it's a handwritten notebook where you're collecting data or you're storing it on some kind of Excel file. So I do a lot of work with Excel just as a researcher, collecting data from field plots. And Excel is a very powerful tool, and you can do statistics and charts and graphs and look at trends in the data. And if you want to collect data about your farm and do that, well, please have at it. That's you can get a lot of good information out of the data you collect from your vineyard. But today I just want to talk about very simple spreadsheets, data sheets, the way MyEV interacts with data sheets in a very simplified form to keep your record straight. Of course, you can also use spreadsheets that are found like on Google Drive or some of these free platforms, which again, we're all doing the same thing. We're trying to collect data in some kind of organized fashion so that we can use it. So with MyEV, there's really two main functions at this point. One is farm and block level data record keeping. So this is the very basic. I'm going to build my farm. I'm going to have my blocks, and within my blocks, I'm going to have information about those blocks, like variety and yield, and where I, sent what processor I sent it to, or how much I got paid for those grapes last year, and so whether you think about it or not, when you build your farm in MyEV, what you're really doing is building a data set, and you're building a data set in the background as a spreadsheet. You're just visualizing it on MyEV, which, can make things a little bit easier and more interactive with the data you collect on your farm. The second function of MyEV, which is what we really started to build it for, was to process spatial data. And so you upload spatial data or you collect spatial data with a data collector, and that goes into the data processing pipeline so that we can clean and trim that data, interpolate it so that you get smoothing and you get data projected to a common grid point. So if you have multiple data layers, those multiple layers of information are projected on the same grid so that you can mine through that data and look at the relationships that are happening in your vineyard. And eventually, when you go through this process, you export that data, and you export it as a data sheet, as a CSV file, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So the way MyEV interacts, so you may have data in a spreadsheet that you can import into MyEV, and whether it's at block level or sub-block spatial data level, and then when you're done working with it, you can export it as a spreadsheet. And the nice thing is that if you are working in, say, MyEV, and you have common information that you put on all your blocks, and you don't want to click through every block and put in that information, say, okay, I know what my yield was for 2022 for every block, but I don't want to click on every block and enter that data. I can download my block data as a spreadsheet, enter all my yield information, and re-upload it, and there it is in my EV. And again, I'll show an example of how to do that. So if I have a farm, different blocks with different information on it, I can go into my EV and hit the downloads button, and then I get options on how I want to download it as either a GeoJSON file, which is a georeferenced spatial data file, or as we're talking, the very simple spreadsheet format called a CSV. So what do those two things stand for? A GeoJSON is a geographic JavaScript object notation. You don't need to know what that means. It just means you can download the spatial data from my EV if you want to upload it to another my EV farm or onto Google Earth or whatever you want to load it onto. You can do that because it works off of JavaScript. A CSV is a comma separated values text file. So it's, again, probably the most simple form of data sheet that there is out there. So don't be afraid of it. You just need to know what the anatomy of that spreadsheet looks like. So computer looks at a comma separated data file like this. And yeah, you're probably going, oh, I'm already going cross-eyed. But when you pull that same data file into an Excel sheet, Excel will look at those anywhere there's a comma, it's going to put it into a different column, and you can look at that data. So again, right now you're probably looking at a lot of data, going, "Oh, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this." And what I want to show you is if you kind of understand the simplistic anatomy of this data sheet, you can build your own, and it becomes more meaningful to you. Okay, so I'm pulling this up in Excel. And I made a simple CSV data sheet. And what you're first going to notice is that the top line across here is what we call our headers. If you're working with like ArcGIS, it's called an attribute file. And you have basically identifiers at the top. So whatever's on the very first line is called your header line, and it identifies what kind of data is in the column, okay? And the second important thing about this data anatomy is you have identifiers for the object you want to attach data to. So in this case, I have this fictional baseball team made up of researchers and other people on the project. And I want to attach data to those players. So in the case of Terry Bates, he's a catcher. Here's his 2020, 2021, and 2022 batting average, where his hometown is, his home state. So any information that I want to attach to Terry Bates has to go on this second line. And I can add data. So if I want another header, I don't know, for, what kind of car he drives. Or I don't know what his home run percentage is, whatever it is I want to add data to, I put a header for it on the top line, and then I put the data associated with those headers on the next. And then I do the same thing for every player that's on the team, right? So any information that I want to have attached to Hans Walter Peterson, the first baseman from somewhere in Minnesota, everything I have about Hans needs to go on this line. What you don't want to do, and this is a big mistake people make, is they will say, oh, I want all of the 2020 data associated with Terry Bates on one line, and then in the next line, I'm going to put all the data for Terry Bates on for year 2022. Don't do that. Everything associated with Terry Bates should go on one line, even if that line goes on forever. So if you have 30 years of yield data on one particular block and you have an identifier for that block, I want all 30 years of that data along this top line. Don't start mixing between lines. So for every object that you want to attach data to, you get a line. And that is why some of these data sheets get so big and they look so complex, but the simple way of looking at it is I have one thing I'm measuring and I attach all that data to that one thing. So in my EV, when you start building your blocks in your farm, it gives an object ID to that block. You can enter the block name and a description, and it automatically calculate the acres based on the block that you draw in my EV. But then you can add any other attributes you want to that particular block. So like block one, if I have a variety, I either Concord or Niagara or Riesling, processor, whether it goes to National or Gallo or to a particular winery, and then what the yield is, and any other thing that I want to add data to. So this is the flexibility part of my EV, is that you know what's important to your farm and what kind of data you want to collect on your farm, and that allows you to add those attributes and add data to it. And you want to keep everything that's associated with block one all on one line, everything associated with block two on another line, and so on. When it comes to spatial data, so say I pull an NDVI spatial data layer into my EV and I process it to a common grid, and then what the target is in that case is a location. So if I have a bunch of points on a map, at that one point, it has a location, it has a unique location, and everything, all the data that is associated with that one point is on that one line. So whether it's, the soil electrical conductivity, the Bloom NDVI reading, the Verasion NDVI reading, multiple years of yield data at that one point location. So everything associated with that point needs to go on that line. And so when we get into these data sets that have, say, 4,000 data points in a vineyard block, you're going to have 4,000 of these rows, and you'll have the data associated with each one of those 4,000 points. So it's important to know what your target is, whether it's a block or whether it's a data point within a block, and then all the data that's attached with it. Okay, so I'm going to go through quickly. I'm going to start with a blank farm. I'm going to add 4 blocks, and I'm going to add data to those blocks, and then I will download it and show you what the created data file looks like, which you can interact with and save and keep in your records and build upon in future years to keep adding data to that farm. Okay, so let me pull up my EV. Okay, so here's my Clairol farm in my EV, but I said I was going to start with the blank farm, so I will. I'll go down to my users, which is my user setting, go to my farms, and I want to add a new farm. I'm going to call it, spreadsheet tutorial. Spreadsheet tutorial farm. It's going to ask me, click on the map to select a location for your farm, so I'll just make it the Clairol lab building as the location. I want to add a block header. So as I said before, my EV automatically generates your block ID. It generates a place for you to put a block name, and it'll calculate the acres. So anything beyond that you want to add. So in this case, we want to add variety. Add it as a text. I'll add another one for processor. So who am I delivering the grapes to? And I'll add another one for 2022 yield in tons per acre. And let's make that a number from, say, 0 to 15 tons per acre by 1/10 of a ton per acre. It's not a required header. And add that header. So as I build my data sheet, that top line that goes across the data sheet will be the block name, a description, the yield, or the area of the block, and then variety, processor, and 2022 yield in tons per acre. I will save that, and it'll build my farm, and it'll give me a blank farm to work with. because I started a new one. All right, so here's my farm. I'm just going to build 4 blocks as quickly as I can. So I go to my farm, my spreadsheet tutorial farm. I say create a block. And my first, we'll just go block 1. Block 1. Say it's Concord. Goes to National Grape. And say last year we had 6.7 tons per acre. And now I need to draw my block before I hit submit. So I'll zoom in on where I want to draw these blocks, hit the little square button, and I'll quickly draw a block. That'll be block 1. I hit submit. Compiles it. And we'll do this 3 more times. Okay, I want to create another block. So this will be block 2. It's going to be variety Niagara. It goes to fruit basket, and it had 9.8 tons per acre. I have to draw the block, so I'll do the one right next to it. Now, if this was your own farm, you'd want to take a little time to make sure you have the boundaries just right. There are 2 of my blocks. I want to create another block. Do block 3. So this time I won't add any of the data. I'll just draw the block. Three. Do it one more time. 4. So again, this is how easy it is to create the blocks that are on your farm. Just click away, whoops, to get your shapes that you like. Okay, now when I go to, I can look at the data that's in those blocks. So if I click on a block, I can see it's 1.18 acres. It's Concord. It goes to National Grape. It's 6.7 tons per acre last year. If I click on the next block, it is 1.12 acres. Niagara goes to Walker's 9. Okay, so all the data that's associated with those blocks. And then you get to the blocks where I didn't put the data in yet. So it gives me the block name and the acreage, but it doesn't have any of the data associated with it. So at this point, there's really 2 ways I can add data to that block. I can go to the block settings and enter the data and keep everything right in my EV. The second way is to download the data sheet to my computer, enter the data on the data sheet, save it, re-upload it, and then it'll be able to be projected onto the blocks. So in this case, we'll go block settings. Say this is Riesling, and it goes to Gallo, and it was, tons per acre. And I save that. Now that data is going to be associated with it. And by putting it into my EV this way, I'm doing it visually, but it's doing the same thing that a spreadsheet would do. But of course, you can visualize by variety, by processor, by tons per acre. You can add labels to those blocks. So we can go with variety, and you can change the colors if you want. So Concord, Niagara, yellow, Riesling, green. And then this one has no value because I haven't added a variety name into it yet. You can, let's see, block name, a header value. So we can go by variety and by tons per acre. So I can now look at this. I know Concord was at 6.7 tons per acre. Niagara was 9.8 tons per acre. I still do not have values for block number 4. So I want to show you how to do it, how to enter data and re-upload it and see what my EV is doing in the background to create that spreadsheet. So I hit my downloads button. So I'm in my spreadsheets tutorial farm, got my blocks up. I want to download this block data. I hit download, I hit CSV, and then I open that CSV. And this is how my EV has built that spreadsheet in the background. So you can see some of these, what's inside the cell is longer than the length of the cell. To make things easy, I just click on this upper corner box of my Excel sheet. I hit Format, Auto Fit Column Width, and now the columns adjust their size to fit the text or the numbers that are in there. Okay, so you'll see for, block 3, block 2, block 1, block 4, so they're not necessarily going to be in the order in which you did them on my EV. So you just make sure you're looking at the right block name. But we know that block 1 is Concord, block 2 is Niagara, block 3 is Riesling, and what processor and tons per acre. But say, let's go block 4 is Concord. It's going to go to Gallo, and it had 10 tons per acre last year. So I've entered the data that way. Now, if you have 50 blocks and you have all 50 blocks listed here, you can go through and say you have a notebook and you don't want to sit there and click on every block in my EV to enter the data. You can take the numbers that are in your notebook and just go down on your spreadsheet and enter the numbers for what the yield was last year and all the other information that you want. And then when you're done with that, you just save it. Close it out. Go back to my EV. And now you want to import your data. I want to choose my file. I know that it downloaded it. I'm going to upload it from the downloads folder that's on my computer. So the last video we talked about file structure on your computer. So how you think about your farm in terms of its farm, blocks, the data that you collect in each of those blocks, whether you do it by year, you should be downloading and uploading your spreadsheet data to those same folders so that you can keep it straight. Just think about the same way as I have a file cabinet. How would I arrange the folders in my file cabinet to keep my data so that when, the tax person asks me, what was your yield or your income for this particular farm on this particular year, I can go to the very folder that I need, pull out that information, and I'm not hunting for it all day long. Okay, so we have this spreadsheet. I've edited the data. I open it up, and it sees all the headers that are associated with that file, and you hit import. And it says, you sure you really want to import this new data? And yes, I've just been working on it. I know this isn't some mistake. Hit yes, and now it uploads. Now I have that new data associated with block 4. So you can enter your data when you build the block. You can leave some of the data blank, and you can go back at a later date, click on the block in my EV and enter the data, or you can download the spreadsheet, edit the spreadsheet the way you want, and then re-upload it and put that new data in. I forgot to mention that when you were in that spreadsheet, you could also add columns. So say you wanted last year's yield and the year before that's yield and the year before that, and you want to have this running record of everything associated with each one of those blocks. You can do that there, and then again re-upload it to my EV to visualize what's going on with your farm. I think the last thing I wanted to mention was the same. It works the very same way with spatial data. So if I have a spatial data set and they're all points instead of blocks, it's the same thing. Every single point you have data associated with it, and that is saved in a spreadsheet. And if you want to download, visualize, edit that spreadsheet, you can do that and then re-upload it to visualize it in my EV. So I think that's good. It's a good introduction to very simplistic data spreadsheets, how to enter data, how to archive your data, and how to build on that data set so that you're always going back to the same spot to get the information about your farm. So have a good one. Remember, anytime you have any questions or need help, you can hit this little bullhorn and you can send us a message and we'll try to get back to you. Thanks again.